Quiet girl's savage response to bullies goes viral. You won't believe what happened. A story by Heartfelt Tales. The cafeteria fell silent. Not the usual hushed quiet that followed Chen wherever she went, but a deafening, suffocating silence that made even the lunch ladies stop stirring their mysterious Tuesday soup. Standing in the center of the room, surrounded by scattered textbooks and spilled milk, Maya looked up at the three boys towering over her. But for the first time in her 16 years, she wasn't looking down at her shoes. I said, "Pick it up," Jake Morrison sneered, his voice carrying across every corner of the packed cafeteria. "You made the mess, freak. Clean it." Maya had been invisible for most of her high school life, and that's exactly how she liked it. She was the girl who sat in the back corner of every classroom, who ate lunch alone while reading worn paperback novels, who could walk through the hallways like a ghost without anyone noticing she existed. Her dark hair always fell like a curtain across her face, and her oversized sweaters seemed designed to help her disappear into the background. She had perfected the art of being unseen, unheard, unbothered. But Maya's invisibility hadn't protected her from Jake Morrison and his crew. If anything, it had made her a target. It started small, as these things always do. A accidental shoulder bump in the hallway. Books knocked off her desk when the teacher wasn't looking. Whispered comments about her thrift store clothes or her silence that followed her like shadows. Maya absorbed it all without complaint, telling herself it would pass, that high school wouldn't last forever, that she just needed to endure. The bullying escalated over months. Jake, supported by his faithful followers Marcus and Tyler, seemed to feed off Maya's quiet acceptance of their cruelty. They would accidentally trip her in the hallways, making her books scatter across the floor while they laughed and walked away. They'd throw crumpled paper at the back of her head during classes, whisper cruel nicknames just loud enough for her to hear, and make exaggerated shushing sounds whenever she was forced to speak in class. Maya's parents, both working multiple jobs to make ends meet, barely had time to notice their daughter's increasing withdrawal. Her mother, a night shift nurse, was always sleeping during the day, and her father, who worked construction and drove for a rideshare company in the evenings, was constantly exhausted. They saw Maya's quiet nature as a blessing, one less thing to worry about in their already overwhelming lives. The teachers seemed equally oblivious. Maya's silence was interpreted as shyness, her isolation as preference. When her grades began to slip slightly, they assumed she was just struggling with the typical challenges of teenage life. No one looked deeper. No one asked the right questions. Maya had tried to tell herself that Jake and his friends would eventually get bored and move on to someone else. She convinced herself that her strategy of silent endurance was working, even as the harassment grew more creative and cruel. They started leaving fake love notes in her locker with humiliating messages, created group chats to mock her appearance, and spread rumors about her family's financial struggles. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday in March. Maya was carrying her lunch tray to her usual corner table when Jake deliberately stuck out his foot. She saw it coming this time, tried to step over it, but Marcus shoved her from the side at the same moment. Maya stumbled, her tray flying from her hands, sending her turkey sandwich, apple, and carton of milk crashing to the floor in a spectacular mess. The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter. Not the good-natured laughter of friends sharing a joke, but the cruel, pointed laughter of a crowd watching someone else's humiliation. Maya felt her cheeks burn with shame as she knelt to clean up the mess, just as she had done dozens of times before. "What a klutz," Tyler announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Can't even walk without falling over herself." Maybe if she actually talked to people instead of being such a weirdo, she'd have friends to help her, Marcus added, earning more laughs from their audience. But it was Jake's next words that changed everything. "I heard her parents can't even afford real food," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. "That's probably why she's always so hungry she grabs at her tray like that. My dad says her family's on food stamps and everything. No wonder she dresses like she shops at the dump." Maya's hands stopped moving. She remained crouched on the floor, surrounded by her ruined lunch, but something fundamental shifted inside her chest. It wasn't anger exactly, anger was too hot, too quick. This was something colder, more precise. It was the moment when someone who has spent years absorbing punishment finally reaches their limit. She stood up slowly, deliberately. The cafeteria watched, expecting her to shuffle away in shame as she always did. Instead, Maya stepped closer to Jake, close enough that he actually took a step backward. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried in the silence with perfect clarity. "You know what, Jake?" Maya said, her voice steady and calm. "You're right about a lot of things. My parents do work incredibly hard for very little money. I do shop at thrift stores. I do keep quiet most of the time. But there's something you don't understand about quiet people." Jake's smirk faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction he was used to from Maya. "Quiet people aren't quiet because they have nothing to say," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. "We're quiet because we're listening. And watching. And learning. I've been watching you for months, Jake. I know things about you that you probably wish I didn't." The cafeteria was dead silent now. Even the lunch ladies had stopped what they were doing to listen. "I know that you cheated on every single test in Mr. Henderson's chemistry class by looking at Sarah Kim's paper. I know because I sit behind you, and you're not nearly as subtle as you think you are. I know that you stole $20 from the fundraiser jar for the children's hospital last month when Mrs. Peterson stepped out of the room. I saw you do it." Jake's face was turning red, but Maya wasn't finished. "I know that you tell everyone your family is rich, but I've seen your mom at the discount grocery store using coupons and buying the generic brands, just like my mom does. I know that scholarship letter you're always bragging about. The one that's supposedly guaranteed? I heard you crying in the bathroom last week because you found out your grades aren't good enough and you're terrified you won't be able to afford college." The color drained from Jake's face. Marcus and Tyler were looking at him with confusion and dawning embarrassment. "I know that you pick on me because it makes you feel powerful, because everything else in your life makes you feel small and scared and helpless. I know that you think being cruel to someone smaller than you makes you bigger, but it doesn't, Jake. It just makes you smaller." Maya took another step closer. Jake, this boy who had terrorized her for months, actually backed away. "But here's what you don't know about me," Maya said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to strain to hear. "You don't know that I've been documenting everything. Every time you've cheated, every cruel thing you've said, every time you've physically intimidated someone. I have dates, times, witnesses. I have photos of the bruises you gave Tommy Peterson when you shoved him into the lockers. I have recordings of the things you say when you think no one important is listening." Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You see, Jake, you made one crucial mistake. You assumed that because I'm quiet, I'm helpless. Because I don't fight back, I can't fight back. But the thing about quiet people is that we notice everything, and we remember everything, and when we finally decide to speak up, we have a lot to say." Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a tablet. With a few quick taps, the sound of Jake's voice filled the cafeteria, captured from just days earlier. "That weird girl Maya is so pathetic. I bet if we wanted to, we could get her to do anything. She's probably too scared to tell anyone even if we really messed with her." The recording continued with Marcus and Tyler laughing and adding their own cruel comments. The faces of students around the cafeteria began changing from amusement to disgust as they heard the casual cruelty in the boys' voices. "I have hours of this," Maya said calmly, tucking the tablet away. "Months of documentation. And you know what I'm going to do with it?" Jake was now visibly sweating, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "I'm going to take it to Principal Davidson. I'm going to take it to the school board. I'm going to take it to your parents and to the parents of everyone you've bullied. I'm going to make sure that every college you've applied to knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Because while you were busy trying to tear me down, you forgot something important: actions have consequences. Maya looked around the cafeteria, making eye contact with students who had watched her humiliation countless times without intervening. I stayed quiet for so long because I thought it would just go away. I thought if I didn't fight back, you'd get bored and leave me alone. But bullies don't stop because their victims are compliant. They stop when they face real consequences for their actions. She turned back to Jake, who looked like he might actually cry. So here's what's going to happen, Jake. You're going to leave me alone. Forever. You're going to leave every other person in this school alone. And if you don't, if I hear about you so much as looking at someone wrong, that documentation goes public. Do you understand me? Jake nodded mutely, his face pale and shocked. I can't hear you, Jake, Maya said, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel that no one had ever heard from her before. Yes, Jake whispered. I understand. Good, Maya said. She knelt down and began picking up the remains of her lunch. But this time, instead of cleaning up alone in shame, students began moving forward to help her. Sarah Kim, the girl Jake had been cheating off of, was the first to kneel down and help gather the scattered items. Then Tommy Peterson, still sporting a fading bruise on his jaw from Jake's last attack. Soon, a dozen students were helping clean up the mess. As Maya stood with her empty tray, surrounded by classmates who had finally found their own courage to act, she looked one more time at Jake Morrison. He was standing frozen in the same spot, his friends having quietly melted away into the crowd, leaving him alone with his shame. You know what the real tragedy is, Jake? Maya said, her voice now filled more with sadness than anger. If you had ever tried to be kind, if you had ever tried to be a friend instead of a bully, you might have discovered that the quiet girl in the corner had a lot of interesting things to say. You might have learned that I read 3 books a week, that I speak 4 languages, that I volunteer at the animal shelter every weekend, that I've been coding since I was 10 years old. You might have discovered that the girl you thought was weak was actually strong in ways you never imagined. Maya gathered her backpack and walked toward the cafeteria exit. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. Being quiet doesn't mean being powerless, she said, her words carrying to every corner of the room. Sometimes it just means choosing when to speak up is worth the most. The weeks that followed were different for Maya Chen. Not because she suddenly became popular or because her personality fundamentally changed, but because she had learned something important about herself. She had discovered that her quietness was a choice, not a weakness, and that when she chose to speak, her words carried weight. Jake Morrison never bothered her again. In fact, he seemed to go out of his way to avoid her entirely. Marcus and Tyler, embarrassed by their association with Jake's exposed behavior, quietly distanced themselves from him and stopped their own bullying behavior. The recording Maya had played became legendary around the school, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. Students began to understand that their actions and words had consequences, even when they thought no one important was watching. Maya didn't become a different person overnight. She was still quiet, still preferred books to parties, still sat in the back of classrooms. But now her silence felt powerful rather than fearful. She had learned to distinguish between choosing to be quiet and being forced into silence, and that distinction made all the difference. She also discovered that standing up for herself had given others permission to do the same. Tommy Peterson started reporting bullying incidents instead of suffering in silence. Sarah Kim confronted Jake about the cheating and reported it to their teacher. Other quiet students found their voices, creating a ripple effect of accountability throughout the school. Maya's story spread beyond just her school. The recording of her confrontation with Jake, shared by students who witnessed it, became a viral sensation on social media. But rather than celebrating the humiliation of a bully, people were inspired by Maya's composed, intelligent response. She became a symbol of the power of quiet strength, of the importance of documentation and preparation, and of the truth that real power comes from knowledge and integrity, not from volume and aggression. The most important lesson Maya learned wasn't about dealing with bullies, though. It was about understanding her own worth. For years, she had internalized the message that being quiet meant being less valuable, that not speaking up meant she didn't deserve to be heard. But her confrontation with Jake taught her that her voice had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be used. Maya's parents, when they finally learned the full story, were amazed by their daughter's strength and wisdom. They realized they had underestimated her, assuming her quietness meant she had nothing to say rather than recognizing it as a conscious choice to listen and observe first. Her teachers, too, began to see Maya differently. They realized that her silence in class wasn't disengagement but deep thinking, and they started finding ways to create spaces where quiet students could contribute without being forced into the spotlight before they were ready. Maya Chen's savage response to her bullies wasn't savage because it was cruel or violent. It was savage because it was honest, prepared, and devastatingly effective. She had turned her perceived weakness into her greatest strength, using her invisibility to gather information and her quietness to choose the perfect moment to speak. Her story became a reminder that strength comes in many forms, that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the most powerful one, and that sometimes the most savage response is simply the truth, delivered at exactly the right moment by someone who has been patient enough to wait for it. Maya never forgot the lesson she learned that day in the cafeteria, that being underestimated can be its own form of power, and that when quiet people finally decide to speak up, the world stops to listen. What did you think of Maya's incredible transformation? Have you ever witnessed someone find their voice in such a powerful way? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories about standing up to bullies or finding strength in unexpected places. If Maya's story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales for more inspiring stories about courage, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your perspective or brighten your day. Remember, everyone has a voice worth hearing. Sometimes we just need to choose the right moment to use it. Until next time, keep sharing those heartfelt tales.